elevated heart rates. They're very scared.
I don't understand. Why would you show us that nightmare?
It's not a nightmare. It's the future.
Is that for real? Felt like it.
And who is that woman?
Her name is Rita Repulsa. She will create Goldar, a huge monster who will rip the crystal from the Earth, and all life on your planet will die. With the crystal, Rita will have the power to create and destroy worlds.
So let me guess. You want us to kill this woman, Rita?
Ay, Rita.
She must be stopped.
When is she coming?
She's already here. My best guess is we have 11 months. Oh, I'm sorry, days. 11 days.
If we're the Power Rangers and this is our ship, if I walk through that door right now, will it open for me?
Yes, of course.
Whoa, what are you doing? No, come back! No, please don't.
Jason, my Ranger team died defending the crystal from Rita. That's why I'm in this war.
How'd you know my name?
Because it's you, Jason Scott. You are the leader. You are the Red Ranger. Rita was a Ranger too, and my friend. But she betrayed us, wanted more power. She lost her way. Now she is just pure evil. You must bring them back, all of the Rangers. You must train your team to stop Rita before she has the strength to find the crystal.
Okay. I'm leaving. And I only speak for myself.
No, you speak for all of them. You know that deep down what I'm saying is true. You were born for this.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and we've got two guests on this week, the hosts of the Comically Pedantic podcast, and that is Derek Chase and Corrine Levy. Guys, how you doing today?
Good.
Yeah, we're doing pretty great. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you on. Yeah. I was really excited to get your email when you said you wanted to talk about Power Rangers today, the 2017 movie. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this movie because I'm one of the few defenders of this movie, I think. So I definitely think it's got some good points that people overlook. So I'm looking forward to getting into it today. But before we jump too much into that, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself? Derek, why don't you start?
Okay. I am a graduate of the Kubert School. So I studied comic books for quite a while, actually. I went to two of my professors were the Kuberts. I had Andy and Joe before Joe passed away, unfortunately. I don't know. The most interesting thing about me is just that I know Corrine and we do this podcast for
Corrine?
I am kind of on the opposite side of Derek, which is what's so fun about doing a podcast with him. I am very new to comics. I have always been wanting to get into them for a long time, and then just there's been points in my life where I've just been into other things. Like my main thing that I do in the outside of the comics realm is I am like a very big culinary person. So like I studied culinary nutrition. I used to be like a cheesemaker for a hot minute. So like I had been a bit busy. But when I met Derek, actually through his fiance, we worked at the creamery together. Derek helped me get into comics. So I've been learning a lot of things from him, like getting a lot of recommendations, kind of finding my own things that I like. So it's fun to kind of find a new hobby with a friend.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And how did you guys end up starting the Comically Pedantic show? Derek, I believe you started it first and then Corrine came on later. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I started the show with just sort of the idea of going over some of the more complicated and weirder aspects of the comic book world, specifically the more the more I would say negative aspects of a lot of things, because that tends to be what I find really interesting. I actually when I first started the show, one of the main topics I wanted to cover was Dave Sim, and his like Cerebus comic book, and then just him in general, sort of things that he has done throughout his life. But then as I started getting into it, it's really hard to write multi-page scripts for an episode and keep things going. And I was originally having different guests on each episode or every other episode, and I really wanted to nail someone down who could sit and do a deep dive into Comicsgate with me. And I wanted it to be someone, one, who knew very little about them, and two, who wouldn't run away screaming after the first episode that we did. And I asked Corrine if she would be my scapegoat, my pincushion, whatever you want to say. And she graciously stepped in, and it was just such a fun experience. I asked her to stay on as long as she wanted, and thankfully she had enough fun that she decided to.
Yeah. Just kind of throwing her in the deep end there, starting with Comicsgate too.
Yeah,
it truly was like, oh hey, do you want to like guest on my podcast? And I was like, I've never done a podcast before, but I'll like tap into my pure millennial side, like why not? And then it just was like shoved off cliff. And there were some very interesting topics first discussed, because we started with in order to even talk about Comicsgate, which I believe, like, when Derek mentioned it, I was like, is that like a President Nixon vibe scandal? Like, I don't know what's happening. It's not really, in case you didn't know, but I'm sure you did know. And yeah, so we had to talk about Gamergate even before we got to talk about Comicsgate. So it was a very like, whew, what a deep dive.
Yeah.
And then thankfully it's gotten brighter since then. Like after that, it was like, here's a treat, Corrine. We're going to talk about Batman. And I was like, thank you.
Yeah, it's been I haven't listened to the Batman episodes yet, but I did listen to the full Comicsgate saga you guys did. And I've had some interactions with some of those people myself, and it's just like been awful. And just hearing you guys laid it out in so much perfect detail, and also in a way that made it very entertaining to listen to, because it's actually a very depressing story, but it was very entertaining listening to you guys talk about it.
Well, I'm glad you got a kick out of it, because man, I was learning.
I was concerned when I was writing those scripts. I was like, because originally I was like, oh, it'll be like 3 episodes long, and it ended up being 6.
Yeah.
I was getting very nervous about how much I was putting in, and I was leaving so much just in the bin, because I was like, oh, we can't get to that, we can't get to that, we can't get to that, and it was still expanding. So I'm happy that like at least somebody got some fun entertainment out of that, because it was a hard thing to research, write, and then record and edit.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Corrine.
Oh no, that's okay. I think the best thing that came out of it though was we really did want to put like a positive spin on it, and like at the end, Derek did end up buying the domain, like fuck Comicsgate, which is still like my favorite thing. I have been telling like all my friends, like it ends up kind of happy, like we do a good thing with it in the end.
No, absolutely. I think that's great. And now you guys are, at least at the time that what I'm listening to now is, you guys are doing a deep dive into the infamous Spider-Man clone saga. What brought that on? What made you decide to do that as the next big kind of project?
I guess I can start that answer at least. It was a weird thing where I was like, I need to find something that I think is interesting, that we can actually dive into together. And I don't want to have another situation where I'm writing script after script after script, and things just keep getting pushed back. And so I actually came to Corrine and I was like, hey, I have a couple of ideas. And one was actually a Batman storyline that I thought we could go over. But the other one was the Clone Saga. and I think I started with that one, and I was like, it's a really bad comic book story that lasted way too long, and I think it would be a lot of fun to read it together. And I don't even think I finished the sentence before she was like, yes, let's do it.
He didn't sell it well either. He like let me know very clearly that it's not good, and I was like, but we'll make it good.
Yeah. I think
I'll
I
make it good. It'll be fine.
I think I mentioned at least in one of our first talks about this that I had started a few times trying to read from the beginning the Clone Saga and gave up.
Mhm.
And I've read parts of the Clone Saga before. I know how it ends. Corrine doesn't. So that's one of the fun things about this is there are things that come up that I kind of keep to myself because I want it to be a little bit of a surprise to her
Mm.
when she gets to it. And we're trying to kind of piece the little puzzle pieces together as we go through it because it doesn't always make sense in the moment
Mhm.
or even in hindsight, but we try to make it make sense.
In short, it's me just progressively getting angrier about one character and Derek supporting me. And trying to make it logical, and I just go full with feeling about how angry I am about it. But it's fun. There's
Mm.
actually really good parts about it, and I think we have found some really positive things, which is nice.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the pleasant surprises because I had read the Clone Saga for the first time a few years ago. Marvel's got like a series of trades for it. I think it's actually like 4 or 5 massive omnibuses big.
Yeah.
And they were on sale a few years back, and I just bought all of them and read through them, and then read through the Ben Reilly trades that came out right after that. And I had two thoughts after I'd finished reading it. The first was, like you'd mentioned, my God, this thing is really long. But the other thing I found was there is actually some parts of it I really sincerely enjoy, and I was not expecting that. So I'm glad you guys have been picking up on that as well as I've been listening to your read through of it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Like we just hit like Amazing Spider-Man 400 like recently, which is when I guess it was technically supposed to end.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh, this would have been such a great ending." Like I think it's
Yeah.
like probably like my favorite piece that we've read from it so far. So it's interesting to see where it's going to go after we've seen the like alleged what could have been the ending. It's very interesting.
We have a long winding road ahead of us.
Mhm. Are you planning to cap it off with the alternate ending they did a few years ago?
I think what we were actually planning on doing is they had released a comic book called I think it was 100 Ways to End the Clone Saga.
Mhm.
And it was a series of ideas that were pitched just to end it.
There was
Which
that, and there was also a few years back. I think it was maybe 10 years ago now. They released it was like a 6-issue miniseries. It was called I think it was called the Clone Saga or the Real Clone Saga, and they brought back like some of the creators, and they basically got to tell the story in 6 issues the way they actually wanted to tell it.
Yeah, I've looked into that. I haven't read that yet, so there is a chance it will show up on the show. But for me, I really enjoy a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So if we were to do that, I think a lot of that conversation would end up being kind of about where did we see this change happen?
Mhm.
What editors were involved? Why was marketing involved at all? Things like that.
I'm guessing you've used Life of Riley as a big source for this.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
I tend to have a bit of trivia at the end of each episode, and it's not always Life of Riley. It is mostly Life of Riley. We usually take just editor Glenn Greenberg's comments, just to give some context to the story that we just read or something that happened within it.
Mhm. Okay. So Corinne, you said that Derek was the one who got you into comics. So what did he get to introduce you to comics?
So Derek told me about Saga, which is, if you don't know, it's from Image Comics. And he had kind of explained a bit of like what the gist is about with it. and my boyfriend Max happened to have like the first 6 books. And I was like, I'm going to read this. And then I just fell in love with it. I think I read all 6 of them in like 2 nights. And then I just like bought myself the compendium up until like they had gone on like years of hiatus. So that really got me into them. And then I think Derek got tired of me talking about how much I loved Saga every time I saw him, that he gave me then just a stack of different comic books. But those were all really fun. I'm kind of building like a little reading list that I'm gonna post at some point, just so like other people can see them. Because a lot of them that he had given to me were like strong female leads, which I think is really cool. So like I've read a bit of Hack Slash, which is fun if you want like a bit of a throwback to 2009 like horror movies. I did try out Miss Marvel because I do tend to lean towards like DC leaning, just because I always have liked Batman, and I just find like a lot of like the horror elements that certain DC like stories bring. But it was nice to try out like a fun Marvel thing. And yeah, I read Sandman a lot. I became obsessed with him. I think that's like a great story to tell. It's super like, if you like mythology of any kind of leaning, that has a lot of really interesting stories in it. And then what else am I reading? Oh god. I've done a couple like little one-shot things, like Seconds, which is the same guy who made Scott Pilgrim. That's another great like one-shot story. But yeah, I kind of go all over the place with what I want to read. It depends on what mood I'm in.
I heard you talking about the White Knight on your show a bunch, and I
Yes.
love that series. I was actually talking. We did an episode on the DCU slate, and one of the things I said, a dream project I would love to see them do is maybe like an animated adaptation of those books, because I think that'd be a really cool way to capture that kind of artwork style and to tell those stories.
Oh, absolutely. I think the White Knight is super fun because it's also just everybody knows like Batman and Joker, and you could see like everyone does a very similar variation, and I love those 2 characters a lot. But I thought the White Knight was cool because how they kind of spin it on its head a little bit, and it makes it a more complicated relationship. I think that's so fun. I love when things are complicated and a nice moral gray area. But I think that whole universe is really cool. And then I haven't seen it. I know they've done like an animated Long Halloween. I can't tell. I haven't seen it yet, but I really love the art style in that comic of the Long Halloween because it is just very like noir-esque. I'm a big fan of that.
We had actually just fairly recently we'd covered Long Halloween on the show. It doesn't really match the art style of the comics, unfortunately, which I thought was a big failing of it. And the first half of it I thought was really good. The second half I didn't like the changes they made to it. So your mileage may vary though, but yeah, we had covered that one. And yeah, we had covered it after we had also had that same guy on to come do the we talked about the comic on the Patreon show, and we did the Patreon show first, and then we did the movie episode, and definitely reading it right before rewatching the movie had a totally different spin on our reaction to it, because it doesn't hold up as well when it's compared to the book, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm always so afraid to like read something right before I watch the movie because I'm just like, there's never, and I feel like Derek and I have talked about this a little bit every once in a while, where it's just like some stories are meant for just certain mediums, and I love to see like what people do, and I'm not a person that's like it has to be a 1-to-1 like, transfer. But sometimes when they make a movie or something, I'm like, oh, maybe should have stayed a book.
Yeah, definitely. And Derek, what was your history with comics? I know you said you went to the Kubert School, but how did you get interested in comics in the first place?
For me, it's a little kind of a long protracted story, because like there were moments of me being super interested in, like, let's say the X-Men animated series or Spider-Man the animated series and the Batman movies that were coming out kind of around the same time, and getting into comic books a little bit through that. But then as like the years go on, you don't really have I grew up in the Midwest. It's really impossible to find a good comic book store, especially one where if you don't have a car, you can get to. So I ended up finding it through other people, where people would bring me boxes of stuff to just go through. I now have a massive collection, and a lot of it is stuff that I bought, but the majority of it, I would say, is probably stuff that was just given to me. So I've read a lot of garbage comic books over the years. But I fell pretty deeply in love with a lot of them. You know, some of the harder times in my life where I was dealing with a lot of depression, you know, I wouldn't go anywhere, but I would sit at home and I would read a series of whatever comics I could find. A lot of X-Men and a lot of Spider-Man, but not just them.
Mhm. I definitely can sympathize with that. I definitely had those periods in my life too, when I would just lock myself in my room and just read like endless X-Men comics. And going back to
Uh,
something Corinne said, because I know she said that she was leaned a little bit more DC. I found that too. Like whatever one was kind of like the one that started you off tends to be the one you tend to lean a little bit more towards. So I tend to lean a little bit more towards Marvel because of that. How about you, Derek? Have you found that too?
Yeah, I go through waves where I will be very interested in specific. X-Men tends to be the thing that I fall back on, and I think a lot of that does have to do with you know, being introduced to the X-Men at a younger age, and it just being a very good idea for a story, and having, God, so many different directions that they have gone in over the years
Hmm.
with different characters to carry those stories. But I go through waves where uh that'll be my touchstone, and then I'll be really into Superman for a bit, or the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or uh right now I'm very into a lot of like indie stuff. I kind of want something that's short and
Hmm.
is a full story. It's one and done. Because uh I get kind of bored reading long storylines. I have to take breaks,
Hmm.
you know. But
Yeah,
again, whenever that ends up happening, I fall back on things like the X-Men.
yeah, I definitely had times like that too when I feel like I've been reading too much Superman now. I need to take a break and just read like a one a one story thing and then be done with it. So that answers my next question too. Is what kind of stuff are you interested in now? How about you, Corinne? What kind of stuff are you really interested in right now?
Well, so to prevent myself from having that problem of getting tired of something, I force myself to never read a similar thing consecutively. So, like, I was just like when I read the first book of Sandman, like I binged that book and I was like, this is great. I know I want more of it, but I'm gonna tuck it away for now, and I'll go back and forth between comics and novels intentionally so I don't get tired of something. Um, so I want to say like the last comic I read was book 2 of Sandman, but then like to spice it up, because a lot of times like there's a lot of very heavy themes with that. Now I'm reading just like some goofy like Janet Ivanovich like fun flirty adventure kind of thing. But then I know after that it's like I want to read Hellblazer. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to like go back into like Deadlands and people dying of ghosts and shit. Um so yeah, I go very back and forth between something kind of goofy and then something very like dark and thriller like, and it's still very like DC focused just cuz again, I am a sucker for like a horror element. Um and a lot of things like that. So that's kind of like the vibe, for sure. There's new
Okay.
saga stuff that's out that I want to read, and yeah, I had just gotten I've never like read any manga or like watched really anime or anything, but a friend of mine after I just went to visit her, she was like, "You have to read Chainsaw Man," and I was like, I'll do anything for you, my guy. So I have to read Chainsaw Man. I don't know when it's gonna happen, but sometime soon.
I will say that my wife loves the anime, so if
Oh,
that's
okay,
anything, any
cool.
recommendation to go on, and she loves that anime. She's watched like several episodes of it. It's got a lot of references to like Western movies and stuff like that too. So there's like a lot of
Okay.
little callbacks and. Uh, But anyway, today we're talking about the 2017 Power Rangers, like I mentioned at the top of the show. What's your history with Power Rangers, guys? Were you guys Power Rangers fans as kids?
I can start that off.
Yeah, we're gonna let Derek start with that.
I'm an old man, so I remember when Power Rangers started, and I was obsessed as a kid. I think I watched all of the Zordon era all the way through. I stuck with it for a little bit after that, and then kind of gave up on it. And in recent years, just because of, I guess, nostalgia, I decided to watch a more recent Power Rangers show, the Dino Fury. And it's, it's a lot of fun. It's very kid friendly. And that's the kind of thing that I tend to really like. I love sort of cartoony, over the top, family friendly stuff. And this was definitely right up my alley. So that's my whole life has had intermittent Power Rangers obsessions, I guess.
Corinne, how about you?
Okay. So for me, Derek and I have quite a bit of an age gap. And so Power Rangers for me was like a show. It would come on while I was like, on a Saturday morning, and I would be like, I guess this is what I'm watching because I'm 4 and I don't know how remotes quite work yet. But it's like a fun, like almost like an acid dream memory to me because I'm like, they're colorful people and they got big robot animals. I tried to figure out which like line of Power Rangers I watched by just constantly trying to go through Google Images, and I'm like, which suits do I remember? Which robots do I remember? And I think we came to the conclusion that it's a mix of like the original one, and then there's a different one where they turn into like jungle animals, and like that is what I can give you. So for me, we were like, we're doing Power Rangers, and I was like, cool, I'm hanging out with my friends today. Like, let's do it.
Derek, I think we're probably similar in age because I was also a kid when Power Rangers came out. I think it was like 10 when it first started airing. But at my school at the time, that was like 10 was like the age when you stopped watching like the more kiddie shit. So like for me, being a Power Rangers fan, it was something I had to hide from other kids at school because everyone else like Power Rangers is so lame, and I'm just like, I kind of like it. I like the toys. I like the show. But I stuck with it throughout. I stuck through the Mighty Morphin era, and I watched most of Zeo, I think, and then Turbo. I didn't watch the Turbo movie, but I watched like the first episode of the series, and at that point, I tapped out. I'm like, no, this is not for me anymore. But yeah, I was into it for a good long while. That's like a good 4 or 5 years or so of just like being obsessed with Power Rangers and the toys and all that, and I had like all the Zords and all that kind of stuff, and I live in Japan where here it's called Super Sentai, and every time I'm in like a store or something, like a recycle shop, they've got a toy section. I always kind of like look over at the Super Sentai stuff and see like, do they have any like the stuff I remember from Power Rangers? Is it cheap enough that I think I can justify buying it?
I just recently started watching one of the Super Sentai series. I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me right now, but it is weird.
It's weird, yeah. Like it. It's also interesting is that Marvel indirectly led to the creation of Power Rangers. Because back in the 1970s, Stanley was really interested in the Super Sentai stuff that Toei was doing over in Japan. So he met with Toei. They struck a deal where Marvel could use Toei characters in comic books, and Toei could make TV shows about Marvel characters. But other than that licensing agreement, there were no restrictions. So there's a Japanese Spider-Man TV show. It only lasted 1 season. It is bonkers because he's wearing the same costume, but everything else is completely different, right?
Oh, that would be so fun to watch, though.
It's available for free online, I believe.
I I gotta find it.
I think
There's a giant robot involved.
Yeah, in fact,
great.
that started the giant robot trend in Super Sentai, because before that they didn't have robots, but Bandai, who was their licensing partner, they started making toys of this. He had a giant robot. He had a spaceship that transformed into a giant robot, and it was called the Leopardon. And the toys sold like hotcakes. So they went to Toei and they're like, we want more of this shit. So they were going to make another one with Captain America, is kind of like, and do a similar thing where they're going to just take the basic name and change everything else around it. But the licensing deal ended, and so they lost the deal. But then they still kept like the basic idea. They couldn't call it Captain America anymore, but now it was Battle Fever J, and it was like a Super Sentai by like the UN or something. So they were all representative of different countries, and they all had giant robots, and that started the trend of the Super Sentai having the giant robots. So Spider-Man helped lead to the Sentai having robots, which eventually led to Power Rangers.
Oh my god, that's so fun. I feel like as a little treat, once we get through like the Clone Saga, we should just watch it.
Oh yeah.
That would be
definitely.
so fun. Ah, so many ideas. I love it.
I will say this, because that show came out at the same time that CBS was doing their live action Spider-Man show, and
Okay.
Stan Lee infamously hated the CBS show, but he loved the Japanese one. Like, he loved like the way the guy moved and everything, and it's got this weird kishy charm to it. It's definitely fun. It's worth a watch.
I would be so down. I'm gonna find it.
So what did you guys think of this movie? Did you see it when it came out in theaters?
I
did
did.
not. You did.
Yeah, I watched it. That was actually the last time I watched it before watching it for this. I came away with the first time I watched it, I really didn't like it. I wasn't wholly against the movie. There were parts I really enjoyed, but I think I enjoyed it more this last time around watching it. But I think the difference there is that I kind of accepted some of the stuff that I really didn't like the first time I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Corinne, how about you? How did you feel?
So I remember like previews coming out when it did come out. But now that I'm thinking about it, so it came out in like 2017, and I was like, what was I watching in 2017? And I realized, like, have you ever heard of Danger 5?
I've heard of it. I don't think I've ever seen it though.
Okay. So if you picture like kind of the craziness how like old Power Rangers was filmed, but it's like fake set in the 60s or 50s, and it's like the most technicolor production that a modern like cheap Australia ever produced. It's like an insane show, and I loved it, and I was like, wow, maybe this is what Power Rangers felt like to other people. And so I was like, okay, so I'm gonna watch this movie. I watched it like on Thursday, and I was trying to remember what Power Rangers felt like to me, and I was like, well, it felt like Danger 5. It's colorful, it's punchy, and it's heckin' goofy. So I'm gonna set the intention of enjoying this colorful, punchy, and maybe goofy movie. I don't know. And then it wasn't that. And I was like, all right, guess we're watching this other movie that I did not set intentions for. But I watched it with my boyfriend, which definitely made it like a good experience. This is a movie I feel like you have to watch with another person.
Yeah, I would actually say that the other difference between me watching it the first time and the second time was I watched it alone the first time. I watched it with my fiance and a friend this last time. And even the parts that were very silly and kind of like, I think, tonally mismatched were more fun because we were sitting with people who also noticed that.
That's an interesting exercise. I've actually only ever watched this movie on my own, so I am definitely curious to see how it would be if I watch with like my wife or someone, or maybe someone who actually has some familiarity with Power Rangers would probably be better. But anyway, Corinne, before we started recording, you had mentioned the Batman Forever episode that we did, and the my guest on that episode, Mark Buskett, he had a great line in his review of this on Letterboxd. I just read it last night. The first line of his review says, Zack Snyder's Breakfast Club Power Rangers is a strange movie. And I think that is probably the best way to summarize this film.
Yeah. Oh my God, it is. Okay. He makes like great points. Cause like, I also gotta say, like, I'm putting it out there now. I'm the strongest defender of Batman Forever. And like, I don't care if someone else thinks that they are a stronger defender. It's me. I am the number one. Like, that movie was made for me and no one else, I don't think. And that's okay. But I really liked his theory that it was a Michael Keaton fever dream. I think that's super fun. In my brain, I'm like, no, this is real. But I love, if that's what someone needs to like believe in order to enjoy it, I don't care. That's fine. That's so great. I love it. But no, I think that is a perfect way to describe this Power Rangers movie. Because we were watching it and they go into detention. And my boyfriend Max and I, we looked at each other and we were like, so this is what they think the Breakfast Club is. I loved it. It was fun.
I found myself enjoying it quite a bit, although I definitely see there's lots of problems with it. I think that, what I loved the most about it is I thought it would like the way that they kind of grew up the Power Ranger mythos and like kind of like made it a little bit more serious and all that. But on this last watch through, what I found myself enjoying a lot more was actually the times when they weren't involved in any Power Ranger shit, when they were actually just kids hanging out. I thought that they actually did a pretty good job of developing the characters.
I liked a lot of the characters individually. Like, my favorite was definitely Billy. I think Billy is like the best character in this. That and then Elizabeth Banks's character. Because you can tell she's just having fun. She's having a great time. And I think my favorite scene out of the whole point is they're doing the classic movie montage. And it is Trini and Kim. And they're just like fighting over like a piece of muffin or something. And I was like, this is the best part of this movie. I could just watch this for 15 minutes and I'd be content.
I felt like it was like two different movies with a lot of the sillier Power Rangers stuff being kind of to one half of that movie, and the serious interpersonal drama at maybe like front loaded at the beginning. And I think they both work. It's just that there isn't enough of a blend between the two of them that made it kind of seamless and flow together. So like, I agree with Corrine. Billy is probably the best character in the movie. But if this were a slightly goofier movie, God, Rita would have it hands down. She is so much fun. And there is not a piece of scenery in this movie that she was not chewing on. It was great.
Yeah.
Now, I do have to ask, as two people who like Power Rangers, now watching this movie, who do you think they made the movie for? Because that was a question I feel like I kept asking myself. Like, I feel like there were moments where I was like, this is a movie for kids to get into Power Rangers. That's fun. But then there were other moments where I was like, or is this for, like, adults and their nostalgia? I kept I feel like tonally, and especially with the way the script was written, I feel like I kept getting confused on, like, is it for one? Is it for the other? I feel like if it's for both, it maybe could have been blended better, because like, especially when like the kids were talking to each other, to me the way they spoke to each other reminded me of so much like when you're a kid and you're playing with all the neighborhood kids and you're playing pretend. Like, you're just playing, like, I don't know, like vampires and werewolves in the backyard, and you're like, oh wait, and now we go here and this happens, and like, oh look at this, we found a magic thing. Like, And I really liked how they talked to each other, because I was like, again, it just made me think of like how I would talk when I was playing pretend, like with my friends. And I was like, this is so wholesome and cute. And I feel like, to me, a younger crowd would really connect with that kind of dialogue. But then they would like move to like talking to the parents or talking to Bryan Cranston's character, and I was like, wait, but this feels more like they're reminding adults of like, hey, remember this thing you really used to like? Pretty cool. So how did you kind of feel like, did you feel like this movie was really made for you, or do you feel like it was more to like encourage younger people to get into it, or both, or something totally different?
I think the intention was it was made more for people like us because, Corrine, you may not know this, but Derek, you might remember several years back there was a Power Rangers fan film that was released on YouTube, and it was like this really adult, dark take on Power Rangers.
It's the one with James Vanderbeek in it.
Yeah, I think James. Yeah, I think he was in. Yeah, that's right, he was in it. But yeah, it was like this. It was super dark. It was like, it's like if Zack Snyder directed Power Rangers, this is exactly what it would be. It's exactly like that. And it was just like I watched it and I'm just like, this is too much. And I'm like, this is just, you're taking something for kids and you've got like Zach sleeping with hookers and you've got people like dying left and right. And I'm like, I think you're pushing it. I understand, there's a desire to have an adult spin on kid stuff, but I think there's a line at some point that you cross, and this movie definitely jumped over that line.
Right.
And yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that I think that this movie, the intention originally was to do something to get a whole new group of people interested in Power Rangers. But then when they started doing it, they remembered how often kids had to hide that they were interested in Power Rangers, and they tried to make it more serious and be like, no, it's okay that you like it. Don't like it's all serious now. There's no camp involved at all. Don't worry about it. But then as they went into it, they were like, well, we got to do the Go-Go Power Rangers thing. We got to stuff like that. So I was a person who, when I saw that Power Rangers fan film, I hated it. And to this day, I don't like it. And I know part of the fun of it is that it is a very serious take on Power Rangers, but I don't think you need that. I don't think it has to be a very super serious show, book, or whatever. You can do serious and still be very campy and fun. That can be done.
Yeah, I think to that point, and Corrine, this goes back to what you're talking about, that scene with Kim and Trini, which I love that scene as well. And I was thinking, as I'm watching this, I'm like, this movie would be a lot better if it had taken itself a little bit less seriously, right? It doesn't have to be as campy as the original, but there's an inherent ridiculousness in this concept that you got to kind of have a little bit of, you have to buy in, you have to have a little bit of fun with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Derek, I know you're a fan of the Boom Studios stuff, because we're talking about having you guys come on to do the Go-Go Power Rangers, one of the volumes for the Patreon show. And I feel like the Boom Studios series, it finds a nice way of finding that middle, right? It's something that it still has an obvious love for the campy original stuff, but it also grows up in a mythos in a way that feels right. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's just serious enough.
Oh yeah, that series is one of my favorites. It is ridiculously well written, I think. I think actually the first time I picked up that series, I think I got to like issue 3 of it, and I remember putting on like my Instagram story something like, this book has no right to be as good as it is. It should not be, like, it shouldn't work, but it does. And I don't know how far you've read into it, but there is a point where they split the series
Mhm.
and you follow the 3 Power Rangers that originally left in the show, and you follow them on a different Power Ranger adventure. And that also, like, that could have been its own entirely new premise for like a TV show or whatever, and I would have been hooked immediately.
Mhm.
It builds on everything that came before it. It keeps the camp, keeps the fun, but there are real stakes involved. The characters are not stupid. They make they make very smart decisions. They just buy into the world that they have.
Mhm.
And that I really enjoy. Like, there is no point where the characters stop and think like, wow, this is really dumb, or we have to somehow explain away the fact that there's a giant sheep monster running through the city. That just happens and you have to deal with it now.
Mhm.
It sounds like they're really committed to like their writing and their theme. And I think
Yeah.
that's how you like succeed in that kind of campiness while also keeping it like very intriguing and like what is the word? Really immersive for people. Like that's why I really like Saga, cuz Saga like it has some crazy people in it. Like there's people with TV heads and, you
Mhm.
know, there's a cat that just tells you if it's lying or not. And those are all very ridiculous things, but it also talks about very like heavy topics. And it's because they're just so committed to being like, well, there's a crazy world, but even if your world is crazy, you know, anything can happen in a world, whether it's
Mhm.
serious or not. It's just you got to be committed to it. You can't be like, "Oh no, is this too silly?" Like
Mhm.
I have to cater to other people. No, you got to commit to the craft.
I mean, I think James Gunn is a really good example of that because you watch The Suicide Squad and it's serious in a lot of ways, right? Like, it's got these real stakes to it, but at the same time, you've got John Cena walking around with a bright red shirt and what looks like a silver toilet seat on his head. And
I
it
loved that movie. It was so fun.
yeah, and that's another example of like this should not work, but it does. And I feel like I get a similar feeling from that Power Rangers series, and I feel like this movie needed more of that confidence in itself to really kind of lean into those absurd aspects of it.
I would
Now,
agree.
I did some digging last night. And by digging, I mean I did a 5-second Google. And I don't know how much you're aware of this, but the director of this movie had done he was a director on one previous movie, and that was a Michael Bay produced project. And then this was the only other movie he did. And the writer of the movie, the I believe the last writing credit that person had was for this movie. So like, I think something, they were trying to go for something, and I can see like a Zack Snyder, a Michael Bay influence in trying to do this. I think that was sort of because this is like right smack dab in the middle of Transformers mania,
Mhm.
and the start of the Zack Snyder Justice League whole universe. I think there was something there they were trying to capitalize on, and these people they brought in were like, yeah, I can do that for you, I can make that thing, and it clearly did not work.
Mhm.
I think that's honestly probably why I didn't see the movie. Not only it's like yes, I barely watched Power Rangers when I was a kid because it was just I just missed like the age where it was like a thing for me to watch
Mhm.
like fully. Um but also just there was a lot of like the Transformers Michael Bay vibe where it's like everything is a CGI robot, or it was like, you know, the Snyderverse where everything is just like it looks like a cutscene from a video game,
Mhm.
to me at least. And that was just like not my thing. I like very colorful things. So I was like, I'll go watch Grand Budapest Hotel. It's got purple in it. I want to go see that. I that was a thing too about this movie that kind of let me down, because again, like, I remembered, I was like, Power Rangers are colorful.
Mhm.
They're colorful, and I want to see like good hues of like reds and blues and pinks and yellows, and like the to me, I was like, I would start naming things that would happen 5 seconds before it happened. Like in the very beginning, where Kim is in the bathroom, I like looked over and I was like, she's gonna cut her hair with those scissors. And my boyfriend's like, no, she's not. Boom, she's got a bob now. Or it would just be like, I think I said it within 10 minutes in the movie. I was like, we're not going to see them in the suits. They're not going to properly morph until we get to Act 3, where they have to be able to morph.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to see very quickly they're in the suits, and then they're going to go straight to the robots that they show us. And it's exactly what happened.
That was a thing that really bothered me, because, you know, you're coming in to see a Power Rangers movie. I understand there is a point where you gotta, like, you have to build up to those kind of things.
Yeah, you gotta
but
tease
it was
it
like
a little bit.
There was like a 2-minute fight scene where they were all wearing the suits, and then it was immediately to the Zords.
Well, and there's also like, there's the 30-second like walk up where it's all of them in line and they got the suits on.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have been so cool and super exciting. And like, they look great. Like, the suits do look good. But the way that they light things in the scene, like, I almost couldn't tell like the Blue Ranger apart from the Black Ranger, which is unfortunate, because it's like, those suits are supposed to be colorful. Like, they're called the Red Ranger because, like, oh my god, that man is red. Or that woman is hot pink. Like, we're rocking and rolling with these colors. And I felt like they kind of just did the Marvel jumpsuit effect with them, which, if they just had a couple more sunny days in it, like, it could be such good color. But yeah,
I had a lot of similar ideas too, because I mean, I think the suits, they're okay. I think I'm they don't have to have like the unitards from the original or anything like that, but
yeah, and like,
I also feel like,
makes sense.
yeah, but I also feel like maybe they're a bit too complicated, and to your point about the colors, I definitely felt that too. I'm just like, it is really dark that the way they're lighting these things, and like, I'm just looking at some of the images from the movie right now, and you compare them to some of the actual like poster artwork where it's much brighter and it's much more vibrant. I'm like, that would have looked so much better if they had actually felt like committed to showing bright colors on film instead of being afraid to. And it is weird that this came out in 2017, because this does feel a lot like a movie that would have come out more like in 2010 or something like that, back when studios were kind of ashamed of doing superhero stuff.
Yeah, I'm surprised like they just didn't really, like, again, like, I feel like they just didn't commit to it. I think they were like a little nervous. I feel like you can kind of tell.
I hated the designs for the suits and for the Zords. I didn't get a strong. I think that the suits looked too similar to each other, and were very complicated. They were too busy, and less colorful in that regard. And then when it came to the Zords, they were incredibly complicated to the point where they didn't look anything like the animal that they are supposed to represent.
That's true. There was a point where apparently the joke was that Billy was driving backwards. I did not know he was driving backwards.
Yeah, I did not catch that either.
I was trying to figure it out. I kept looking because apparently there were a couple times he was driving backwards. And I was like, I don't know. Where is the head? Where is the ass? I don't know. Donde está? I will say, though, positive note, I think the Rita Repulsa costume was great. Because you get the nice, like, kind of, like, villainy, like, dark green, and going with, like, the gold. I think that's a really good, like, almost, like, luxury kind of color combo. And I remember what she looked like from like the OG, where she just got like crazy spikes hanging out of her head and they're all rubbery and stuff. And I know they're not gonna do that in 2017, and that's fine. I thought they had a cool modern spin on her because it did allow her to still just like use her physicality to just be like an unhinged bad guy alien person. Which so that was fun. I did like her whole look with that.
Derek, I'm totally with you on the Zords. Like, I mean, I've seen this movie several times, and for the life of me, if you put a gun to my head, I don't think I could tell you what actually happens in that big Zord fight. It's just incomprehensible. And I was thinking back to the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, right? That where they had like the CGI Zords and all that, and we had done that on the show a few years back, and when I rewatched it, I remember thinking like, God, these Zords look terrible. They're just ugly. Like the CGI was not that advanced. And the CGI in this film, honestly, it's not that much better. It's still pretty incomprehensible.
There were
I would agree with that.
Yeah, there were a couple moments where it's like, okay, I can like see kind of what is happening. But then other moments I was like, I think this is like the same quality of like Spawn.
Mm-hmm.
So also, how did you feel about like the big Megazord? Because I had thoughts on that. They took away like all the color, and also they're not in the same control room. Isn't that the whole thing? They work together in like one room that no one knows where it actually is on the big robot, but they like are together.
It always confused. As a kid, I was always trying to wonder, how does that even work? Do they have like tunnels in the Megazord that transports them from one to the other?
I always thought that they were just like in the face, because I was like,
well, yeah, that part. But like, how do they get from the Zord cockpits to the center? Is what I was always trying to wonder about.
I figured it was that like Star Trek beam me up to the face kind of thing.
Well, they're in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie from the 90s, there is a scene where after the White Ranger docks on the Megazord, there's a door that opens up at the behind the command center, and he's in a chair, and the chair just like moves forward. So there is like some sort of like a tube system, I guess, that like takes him in, which is really interesting.
I would love if there was like a roller coaster that was like you're at like the foot of the Megazord. You have to get to the command center, and it's just some kind of mega drop indoor roller coaster situation. I think that'd be a great time. Also very educational.
But to answer your question, like I hated the Megazord design. It just looks it's not colorful at all. It looks like a very nondescript, again, talking about the Transformers influence, it looks like a very nondescript Transformer, like an extra in a Transformers movie.
Yeah. There is actual design that goes into a lot of the Super Sentai mechas that Power Rangers basically just takes. And it seems like there was nothing here. So like you can point out the original Megazord by silhouette. You can do that with almost all of them. And I could not tell you what this thing was unless you told me it was from Power Rangers and that it was a Zord. I wouldn't be able to tell you what it was if you just gave me the silhouette.
I mean, you can't even tell the different components of it. Like I'm looking at the thing and I'm like, which one's the Triceratops? Which one's the T-Rex? I can't tell at all.
The only thing I could find...
how did they...
Oh, sorry. The only thing I could find was just like the jet was put on the back. Just it was just like slapped on there. But that's like all you can tell. Because they throw them into a pit, and that's just like how they blame all the color getting melted off.
Yeah.
And I think that they forget that one of the really fun parts of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers TV show was getting to see the Zords come together. We don't see that at all. It's just they fall into a pit and then this Megazord comes out of it. That's not fun. That like you got to watch the whole transformance in the show, and that got you hyped.
Yes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And if you're thinking of it from also like the marketing side, you would want to sell toys off of this movie because they sell toys off of every superhero movie. And like now I'm thinking of it with like Transformers, where it's like you can clearly see how like Bumblebee goes from Bumblebee to the Chimera. There are steps, it's a puzzle, but it gets from point A to point B, and it's very clear on how that happens. You see where like the tires go and everything. If you gave me this as a toy, I could not tell you how to put it together, how to take it apart. I would just be like, this is the toy. It's just stuck like this. And that's not the point, I feel like. That's not what's playable about it.
Absolutely. I mean, to Derek's point about the design and all the work that goes into it, you know, on Netflix, they have The Toys That Made Us, and they did an episode on the Power Rangers. And, you know, they talked to the Japanese designers who had actually gone in and designed these things and talked about how they put them together and everything. And there's, you know, so much thought they put into, like, how are they going to look? How are they all going to fit together? How can we make these very different things all fit into one big piece? And it's really kind of marvelous the way they were able to do it when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of like creativity and like just kind of engineering skills to create something so interactive like that. For sure.
And that was one of the most fun parts of the toys, was not so much the Power Rangers figures themselves, but playing with the Zords and putting them all together. That was, you know, I mean, I used to put those damn things together and take them apart nonstop for hours.
I used to try to do what they did in the show. Like, you get to see not just like how they put together, but there's a very specific sequence in which they go. And it just made sense to try to do that with the toys, you know. And if you're making this, I assume you're going to be selling this to kids or adults that still really like to have these figures. But like, you would want to have something that people enjoy about putting them together.
I do want to talk about Elizabeth Banks, because like you guys very accurately said, she is far and away the best part of this movie. Like, I feel like she is the only person who really got the assignment correct. She's like, oh, we're doing a modern Power Rangers, so there's got to be a degree of camp in it. I think she's the only one who actually understood that part of it.
And I love camp. So, like, the fact that I feel like she almost went with it with like a theater kid approach, where she's like, the camera is not my audience. The audience is like hundreds of yards away from me. I gotta make sure they see me. And I saw her. I was like, she was killing it. And I think a lot of acting like that is very fun. Like, if I had to pick like if I had to swap genders for this role, I would want like a young Tim Curry to play this role. And I think that they did good. I think she did great. I think she hit like a good kind of Tim Curry, almost like zaniness to it, which I'm a sucker for.
You're right. It's almost like she's putting on a bit of a Tim Curry impersonation at some points, like even with the weird accent she's doing and everything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was thinking last night while I was watching this, and it might be because we had just talked about Batman Forever, but I was like, Schumacher should have done Power Rangers.
Oh, hell
that's
yeah.
what should have been done.
I would have seen it if that was the case. If they started a like trailer and they were like, hey, do you remember this Batman Forever movie? Do you also remember Batman and Robin? Do you want to watch him take control of 5 teenagers in a movie? Here you go. I would have bought a ticket. I would have gone to the premiere, gotten myself like a big old thing of popcorn, and had a hoot and a half. I would have been so thrilled.
Well, I mean, even in the Batman movies, there are like neon gangs. So like there is a design aesthetic moving in that you clearly remember. It is easy to see. And then in this movie, they were like, oh, we have to have some sort of minion to fight named the Putties. So let's just make them a jumble of rocks that you cannot see. There is nothing interesting about them.
I literally
Schumacher would have
forgot
gone
about them.
bananas with them.
No, absolutely. And it was funny when we talked about not to go too down the Batman Forever rabbit hole, but one of my big problems with that movie is that it doesn't seem to know if it's supposed to be a camp movie or if it's supposed to be a serious movie,
Yeah.
and it just ends up being really horny instead. Whereas Batman and Robin, like I can go back and watch that. I'm like, you know what? As a modern day version of Batman 66, it kind of works a lot more than it
Right.
doesn't. And I actually enjoy that more than Batman Forever. And if you had someone like Joel Schumacher taking that approach with Power Rangers, I think that would have been a lot of fun.
Did you guys ever watch Spy Kids?
I never did.
Okay,
No.
because I was gonna say how. Okay, so Spy Kid. Maybe that was what I was watching instead of Power Rangers. Then I guess. But it's like CGI was kind of just starting, but it is like a wild adventure. I mean, I highly recommend it because it's truly just a trip. Like, watch it in the middle of the night with some popcorn and just don't even think about anything. Just watch it happen. But there is a kind of campiness and goofiness and childlike wonder to Spy Kids. Probably because it is intended for kids. But
Yeah,
I
I
feel
mean,
like if you took someone who made that and
you know,
used them for this movie, I think
it
it also would have
always
been like a substitute.
it always blows my mind to remember that Robert Rodriguez directed the Spy Kids movies, and then he also
Oh
went and
yeah.
he did like the Planet Terror and the El
Yeah.
Mariachi trilogy and From Dusk Till Dawn, and I'm just like, I think I would want to see Robert Rodriguez's Power Rangers too. The only other person
I
I
think
would
it could
say,
be fun.
From Dusk Till Dawn is like as weird and horror filled as that movie is, it's also really campy.
it's very campy. Yeah, Planet Terror too,
Oh,
right? Planet Terror is
yeah.
supremely campy, and I feel like again. When they did Grindhouse, I feel like Robert Rodriguez got the assignment. Quentin Tarantino, not so much. And because Robert Rodriguez really leaned into the camp stuff with that movie.
And I think
Oh,
that's
man.
what Power Rangers needs. I think that's what we've learned today, guys, is that there are just some franchises that require camp.
Yeah.
I would have it would have done well with more camp and less of the weird sexting storyline that happened with Kimberly.
My God. If I may just rant a moment. I love that they try, and by love I mean I can't stand the fact that they tried to make a character have like a thing they did that was bad, but like you gotta forgive her. I'm sorry, but you can't forgive that. That's foul. Like that she could be lit if that happened like in the real world and not in a movie. She could 100% rightfully be arrested for that because that's like sharing
That was
pornography
revenge
of a
porn.
minor.
It was revenge porn. Yeah, that was a weird element to put in.
And straight up, like, Jason's just like, oh, but you're not a bad person. I'm like, no, Kim, you're a bad person. I'm
Wait,
sorry.
didn't she show the picture to Jason too?
Yeah,
So
he did. She's like, look at
learn
this
her
picture. I'm like,
lesson.
and she's
not
explaining
bad.
why.
Learned a lesson.
She's explaining how she learned the lesson while she's actively breaking that idea.
Oh, pissed me off. I was so mad. I was like, why is she the Pink Ranger?
The only good thing I can say about that is there is a weird tendency in movies like this where there is a strange bit of voyeurism that everyone is engaged in, where the movie makes you passively a part of it and they show you the thing that they're showing to other people, and at least this movie didn't do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank God. That would have been really uncomfortable. One thing I did like, because I'm gonna I know that like overall I was like, this movie is not for me, but like again I get to talk with my friends because I watched this movie, so it's fine. But one thing I did like was that when they got their superpowers, like Billy's personality stayed the same. Like he's still a kid with autism, but he's just really strong now, and I think that that was like really great because it's kind of like it's almost like the Percy Jackson effect where it shows like kids with Percy Jackson. It was like, oh, these kids have like ADHD and they have dyslexia, but because they're like demigods in Greek mythology, it's actually like a strength for them.
Mhm.
And I think it's really cool that it's like, oh, well, now, like, you know, a kid can watch that and be like, oh, I feel like I'm a lot like Billy, but I could be like just as cool and strong as him one day. And I thought that was like a very nice thing because he's still my favorite. I will forever root for Billy. He was so fun to watch.
Oh yeah, I think he was definitely the best outside of Elizabeth Banks. Definitely my favorite performance in this movie.
Yeah, they're like my solid top two.
One of the changes too I liked is I like that they established that Rita herself and Zordon used to be Power Rangers. Because that was always one of the things of just like watching the TV show. I was actually very curious about the lore and the world aspects of it. Like, well, if she's been in prison for what 10,000 years or something, what happened before that, right? How does Zordon get trapped in this time warp? Where does all this stuff begin? And I actually thought it was really cool to show that Zordon was originally the Red Ranger and Rita was originally the Green Ranger. And she even still has aspects of the Green Ranger costume in her look.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting twist. I wasn't as sold on it, I think, as you were. But I think for me, it was more to do with I really enjoyed that Rita was just kind of a witch in the original series. And a lot of the fun, weird aspects of her character came from her being a witch. And in this, it's not really fully explained other than she's a Power Ranger. And it looks like she does a little bit of magic, but it could be just manipulating the morphin grid or something like that. I don't know. But having her be a witch with like weird little goblins around her was just, that was something I really enjoyed. And it's not in this.
I think as someone watching this without much knowledge of like the previous content, like just kind of sitting like, okay, I'm gonna watch a movie. I think the way they started the movie was good. Because if you just started it with like not explaining like the previous Red Ranger or Rita or any of that, like you would have been confused, I think, just watching it without that kind of context. Because I'm sure there are some people that didn't know about Power Rangers before watching this. So I think the way they kind of set it up was good. And I was like, all right, I get it. I'm down. It also made it a fun kind of hook to the movie. Like, you're just thrown into the action right away, and you're like, this is the world you're in. And it's like, okay, I'm strapped in.
I also like that the Rangers in their civilian identities didn't all dress in their color, because that was something that was always kind of weird to me in the original TV series, especially when Tommy goes from the Green Ranger to being the White Ranger, and then he has to change his whole wardrobe. So
even when they switch from Mighty Morphin to Zeo,
right? Yeah,
because like all of them have the color change.
Did they do that like really intensely? Because they had subtle like color assignments.
They had
like,
subtle colors, no, but they did it intensely in the original show. Like they wore like everything in that color. And
to me, when I think of like them in like kind of civilian garb in the old show, I just picture like Full House people, but with different faces. I like can't picture the colors that they wore.
I mean, you're not far off. There's definitely an aspect to that in the civilian performances.
Nothing wrong with that, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Oh, I also did like that it felt a little bit more random how they all come together. Like they're all kind of drawn to the coins. Whereas in the show, there are these 5 kids. They all conveniently dress in the colors they're going to get as Power Rangers. And they're already friends and martial arts expert. Zordon just picks them. And it always I always thought it was kind of funny how when they did the stories when the bullies were trying to find out who the Power Rangers are, it's like, does nobody think to ask the 5 or 6 kids who always hang out together, always do martial arts, always seem to be getting in fights with monsters in the park, and who all conveniently dress in the same colors as the Power Rangers?
Oh no, that's
and
too
also
obvious.
like when someone leaves the show and then they cycle in other people who wear the exact same color as the person who just left.
They didn't have the budget for other costumes. They're
I
just
guess
like,
not.
Rick left. You're in, Steve.
I did like that aspect of it. What did you guys think of Bryan Cranston as Zordon?
I mean, I like Bryan Cranston. I think he is just a fun guy. So just to see him in anything, I'm like, I can get down with it. I thought I remember Zordon being just like a blue face in a tube.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was kind of an interesting modern spin to have him as like the kind of like nanogrid almost. I think maybe I just wish it was more blue. Colors mean a lot to me, if you couldn't tell by now.
Well, I mean, colors should mean a lot in a Power Rangers movie too.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's symbolic. So, and I like looking for stuff like that. But yeah, I think again, but overall my notes are going to be like, if it was a little more saturated, I think it could be more fun. But I thought he did a good job as the character. He was very informative, and I feel like that character is meant to be informative.
Derek, what do you think?
Yeah, I was a big fan of Bryan Cranston as Zordon, and if they were to do a complete reboot, like today, and do something, I would want them to keep Bryan Cranston as Zordon. I think he did just the right. I don't know. I maybe like gravitas or something. He has the right voice for it. You know, when he speaks, you're like, oh, I should listen. That's kind of what he brings to the table. And it's also fun because, you know, he voiced some of the monsters in the original show.
Yeah.
That's why Billy's last name is Cranston. He was named after Bryan Cranston.
Oh, I did not know that.
It's fun that they brought him back.
I had read that he had done some of the voice of the monsters, but I didn't know that's why they gave Billy his last name. That's really cool. Yeah, I really liked him. I like that he wasn't the Zordon from the TV show where he's, you know, this kindly wizard guy who's always saying the right thing and is always very. I like the fact that, you know, there's some pushback between him and the Rangers, and like, you know, him and Jason are arguing back and forth, because I was, you know, you watch some of those episodes. I remember when Tommy came back as the White Ranger and Zordon just introduced him. He's like, "Oh, here's your new leader. What do you think of this?" And then it cuts to Jason. He's like, "This is great." And I'm just like, dude, he just fucking demoted you. Don't you have a better reaction than that?
The same thing happened when they went to like Zeo. Like there was Rocky was the Red Ranger, and they were like, "Oh, you're blue now because we got to give Tommy the red spot because that's the leader of this team."
I do have a question.
Okay.
What did you guys think of kind of how the fight scenes and a lot of like the car chase scenes, like how did you feel like how they were filmed? Because I definitely had some thoughts.
Honestly, the action was one of the least interesting things of this movie for me. Like that was actually where I really started tuning out. I think I actually fell asleep during the Zord fight at one point.
I would agree. I actually complained last night about the lack of martial arts in the movie. It is very uninteresting fighting. There is nothing in there that I was like, oh man, I want to go and sign up for a class to learn how to do this kind of thing.
Right.
It was just generic punching and throwing people around. And that's not like, that's fine for a regular movie, but this is Power Rangers. Yes. You're supposed to have like some kick-ass fight scenes.
Yeah, I would agree, because from, again, what I remember is a lot of like crazy kicks, funky punches, and then eventually when things get really tough, they then resort to like the robots. But another thing that I felt like with just like the cinematography almost, I feel like it made me a bit directionally impaired. Like they would be, especially when like in the final scene, I like couldn't tell like what street they were on, like in relation to like who are they fighting in relation to where is everybody, how did they eventually meet up? I felt like it was just very confusing to watch. And maybe it's
Well-
just because like the CGI maybe needed a little more attention, or they maybe needed like a redesign on how things looked to make it easier to look at. But also same with like the sizing of Goldar against the like Megazord. It was
Mhm.
like at first I was like, wow, Goldar's like a lot bigger. And then another scene would happen and I was like, oh no, they're the same size. It almost felt like I was like competing with an optical illusion. I was like, I don't know how big these things are anymore. And I also don't know what street they are. How close are they to the Krispy Kreme? Like where is all this happening anymore? I don't know if you guys felt as directionally impaired as I was.
I didn't notice that, but I think that's it definitely speaks to what Derek was saying earlier about the fact that this director has obviously not done a lot of a lot of movies, because
Yeah.
if you're going to be doing a fight scene, like you should really have either some experience, especially something that's as big as Power Rangers, where a big focus of that, again, to what Derek was saying, a big focus of that TV show was the action. You weren't going into that show, and the actors weren't cast on their incredible acting ability, right? I mean, Amy Jo Johnson was the only real actor of the bunch, and she's pretty much the only one who had an acting career after she was done in the show. But everybody else, they were cast for their martial arts skills or their gymnastics ability, and
Right.
that's why you watch that show, because the characters honestly were very flat in that show. They didn't have a lot of dimension. They didn't have a lot of depth. They didn't have a lot of conflict with each other. It was just, they were very bland. And so you watch that show so you could watch the action scenes.
Yeah.
So if you're going to get someone to direct this movie, and it's great that they're beefing up their performance side, and they're trying to give these characters a little bit more depth. I really did appreciate the effort, even if it was misguided in the Kimberly situation. But I feel like you shouldn't have done that at the expense of all the action.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's plenty of opportunity for this movie to have had some just really standout scenes.
Mhm.
And I don't really think that was made a priority. Like, you could have had, like, Shang-Chi has some amazing fight scenes in it.
Oh, yeah.
And you could have done something very similar with these characters. You don't have to make them incredibly super powerful where, they hit a brick wall and it falls apart or whatever. You could have them like learn the martial arts and have that be something that was driving those action scenes.
Mhm.
And I mean, you can't really do the same thing with the Zords, but it would go a long way if you could kind of see what was going on.
And I think with the Zords, it's almost like they put the detail in the wrong places.
Mhm.
Like, it seemed like, because with the older robots, from what I remember, there was a lot of just solid color and like bare bones but distinctive shape. And it was almost like they did too much with like the fine detailing of these ones, where it's like there's a lot of different lines and outlines and different colors happening. But it's cool that you can do that, like, technically.
Mhm.
But that's not what you need right now. You need to know where the head is, and you need to know where the ass is on a Triceratops.
Yeah.
They can't look the same.
I did a fun little exercise last night where I paused it after they introduced all the Zords, and I said, tell me what they are.
Mhm.
And the only one that was given was Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah.
Nothing else. They could not figure out what they were.
What is
I
the
don't even-
Black Ranger supposed to have? Is
Mastodon.
Yeah.
Okay. I had no idea.
Mhm.
I was like, I thought one of them had a mammoth. Was I wrong? I had no clue what was happening with that one. It was kind of wild.
Also, in fact, now that you mention it, I don't think they ever mentioned the names of their animals, did they?
No,
Nope.
they didn't.
We
Okay.
didn't get a kick-ass scene where they all yell out the animals.
Also, the way I just thought of it, the way he says it's morphin time is really underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, if you think of someone saying it's morphin time, it is loud, it's enthusiastic, it's almost like you're really happy that it's morphin time. Not that there's like
Take
danger afoot, but he was so
take
serious.
the scene from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 90s movie where they first morph in it, and compare that to when they first morph in this, and it is just wildly different. They're just the energy behind saying it's morphin time is so much more pronounced in the original movie versus this one where he just kind of goes, it's morphin time, and then they step onto a platform.
I feel like that was something where they're like, okay, we have to have this line in the movie, but nobody really wants to say it. So that's really kind of what it felt like to me in that scene.
Yeah, I think my one big note is go full out with feeling.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And maybe 2 people got that note. From me in 2023 to the people in 2017. My note for you.
No, yeah, I think that's a pretty good note to end it on. Like, you know, as much as there are things I like about this movie, like I do like the character stuff for the most part. I love Rita. I think Zordon was pretty well done. I thought Bill Hader did a pretty decent job as Alpha, even though I thought the design was weird. Like they made him very oddly nightmarish looking for some reason.
Oh yeah.
God, I hated that design.
It was so weird.
He's a funky frisbee.
They did give him they gave him some fun lines. He's kind of funny. He says I. He says go Power Rangers. So they kind of gave him some fun stuff to play with, but God, they made him terrifying to look at and genuinely horrifying in his introduction scene.
Yeah. Well, also, like, going to what Corrine said about the detail, too, and focusing too much about, like, Derek, you probably know this, too, because you're an artist as well, but that's one of the things you learn is that if you focus too much on these small details at the expense, you have to take a step back and see how it all works together as a larger piece.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's like doing a paint and sip. Like, I didn't go to art school, like, cool Derek here. But boy, have I done a paint and sip every once in a while. And they tell you, like, hey, put the wine glass down, take a couple steps back from your piece, and then maybe stop touching it. And it's a great, you gotta do it. If you keep hyper-fixating, it's gonna get splotchy. And that's what happened with these robots. Got splotchy.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's disappointing. I know their Netflix is doing has a big Power Rangers new series they're going to be doing with like they're going to have like a more adult oriented one. They're going to have like a more a kids oriented one too. I understand they're planning on doing like this whole big Power Rangers cinematic universe thing. Is what I'm not sure if that's still what the plan is. That's what it was a few years ago, at least.
The last that I read about it, that was still the case, but they've not really given any updates other than they're doing this 30-year anniversary once and always, and they are bringing back the Dino Fury Rangers in a new series called Cosmic Fury.
Okay.
But like I think they're too focused on getting those out the door to say anything more about the other programs.
Well, I mean, which is probably for the best because, I mean, as we saw with the Snyderverse stuff, when you're trying to do too much stuff at once, it ends up kind of blowing up in your face.
Right.
But yeah, I think if they had taken more of a cue from what the Boom Studio stuff is doing, I think this could have been an interesting project. And I think there is a way to do Power Rangers in a more adult way without being this self-serious about it.
Without going essentially Zack Snyder for the whole thing. I don't need it to be like a Marvel movie either. Like that's its own tone. But it can be something, you know, I'm just going to keep going back to Schumacher or, you know, something a little bit crazier. Like, let's have fun with it.
I'm in full support.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Totally agree with that. Okay, guys, this was a lot of fun, though. Thank you so much for coming on. But why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff?
You can find all of what we do at comicallypedantic.com. We'll have links to our shows, links to some of the different social sites that we use. Lots of fun stuff where we put up visual companions to some of the things we go over. If I'm doing a deep dive into something, you get all of the references that I use in order to write those scripts. So you can fact check me if you'd like. I'm totally on board with doing that. We don't have like a Patreon or anything because honestly, I'm not super interested in doing that kind of thing. This is just fun.
We just do it for shits and gigs.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to send us money, we'll take it. We'll use it to we'll pay for the server space or something with it. But like, we're not going to come out every week and say, oh, you have to donate money if you want to hear like the whole show or whatever. It's just kind of a fun thing. It's not meant to rile anyone up except for maybe some Comicsgate people.
It's mostly just me. It's to make me annoyed with Kane and the Clone Saga. But no, this is just a thing that like so Derek and I used to live like 15 minutes away from each other, but now I have like moved to a different state. And like both me and like his fiance and Derek and like my boyfriend, we're all like very close friends. So this is just how we stay connected. And if people like to listen, like that's cool. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to our opinions and thoughts. But yeah, we just do it for fun. We love Comically Pedantic.
Yeah, it's a great show. Definitely listen to it. Definitely check out the Comicsgate series because that was extremely well done. And the Clone Saga episodes are fun. I've definitely been enjoying those. But guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And that does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephiles. SuperheroCinephiles.com is the website. Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And if you join, I am going to ask you guys for money because if you join the Patreon show, you get these episodes a week in advance, and you also get the Superhero Cinephiles book club. Hopefully, we're going to have you two on to talk about Go-Go Power Rangers at some point, and we'll hopefully get that set up soon. Depending on how schedules work out, it might actually come out before this episode does, since these episodes are recorded way in advance. But thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.